Welcome back to the show, folks. Looks like it's another week of the Iran war, the Epstein files, and in a chilling turn of events, we get another virus for our 2026 bingo card. And that's not to mention the release of documents pertaining to aliens and UAPs that the Trump administration has promised would start today. For today's show, we'll be talking about Hantavirus, the thing that's giving everybody COVID-era flashbacks. Then we'll be going over that White House Correspondents dinner, the conspiracies behind it, and my personal take on what's going on. Finally, I have another Epstein update for you guys, this time about the suicide note that Epstein left behind in his cell before his first suicide attempt in jail. I have a theory I want to talk to you guys about that I think makes the whole thing make a little more sense. I imagine we'll be talking about almost nothing but aliens next week, so let's dive in before reality gets even weirder than it already is. And congratulations to one of my best friends, Alex, for getting married this weekend. During the reception, we kind of played like a Guess Who game with pictures of people's pets. And guys, this is my Panzer. So I'll definitely be hanging that on the wall. But before that, follow the show on Instagram and TikTok. There will be links in the show notes. If you want to reach out to the show, as always, you can email info@jetfuelcan'tmeltsteelbeams.com. I'm your host, Michael Mooney, and this is episode number 21 of the Jet Fuel Can't Melt Steel Beams podcast.
This is the age of misinformation, get information. No homosexuals, Democrats, or immigrants in your nation. I gotta think about anything else. I try to cope, but it's bad for my health. I don't even think that anything helps. This is the most paranoid that I've felt. This is the age of misinformation. How could you be sitting so patient with all the sins that you'll be kicking?
So it seems like all of social media and the internet is on the edge of its seat this week because reports of a cruise ship, which started in Argentina and then went to Antarctica and went through the southern Atlantic, has had some instances of some unusual illness and even death. As of the recording of this segment on the 7th of May, there have been 3 deaths on the boat. There's also been one passenger that's been transported to a hospital off the boat, and there's been another 3 that are ill and awaiting transport. And all of this is occurring off the back of a disease that I hadn't even heard of until this week. The symptoms for this virus, which I hadn't heard of before, include fever, muscle aches, fatigue, and in the variant that runs in North and South America, there's also the attack of the pulmonary system. And here's a huge detail as well. The latency period on this disease is 1 to 8 weeks. And basically a latency period is this period of time between getting infected with a virus and actually showing symptoms of being sick. And so in theory, if a virus or an illness has a long latency period, people could be transmitting a virus or bacteria to other people and not even know it. And for this disease, there's no actual cure. People just kind of treat the symptoms, and the mortality rates are estimated as high as 50%. So amongst war in Iran, increasingly scarier AI models, and economic turmoil, especially all that pain at the pump, we get another viral outbreak, this time the Hantavirus. 2 of the 7 illnesses, which I just mentioned, have been confirmed as Hantavirus, and the World Health Organization suspects the virus may be spreading from person to person. And the comparison is obvious once we've said all of that. COVID-19. People are breaking out all their COVID-era memories because, much like in February of 2020, Hantavirus seems to be this ominous threat that hasn't quite made it to the shores of America yet, but in this case exists on some cruise ship that's docked. And until Hantavirus becomes a full-blown threat like COVID was, the conspiracies surrounding Hantavirus will probably continue to increase. So I wanted to quickly go over a few conspiracies from the COVID era once again, and go over one in particular about lockdowns, so that we can really gauge how fearful we should be that Hantavirus is some government-made disease to basically distract us from the Iran war or the Epstein files, and kind of put the virus in context with some of the lessons we should have learned during COVID-19. Conspiracies that surrounded COVID, especially when it was first starting out, revolved around lockdowns, restrictions on the freedom of movement, and COVID being used as a bioweapon. And of course, there were all the conspiracy theories that COVID basically didn't exist. So barring the idea of Hantavirus simply not existing, could our government be bioengineering another pandemic to prevent the public from beginning to organize enough to protest the war in Iran or the Epstein files? And what move would be coming next? So I thought we could start with a little timeline from an AP article, which I'll cite in the show notes. So on April 1st, the MV Hondius, which is the cruise ship in question, departs from Argentina. And by April 6th, you have the first passenger, a 70-year-old man, fall ill. 5 days later, on April 11th, a passenger dies on board the ship. 13 days after that, on April 24th, the body is removed from the ship at St. Helena. The passenger's 69-year-old wife leaves and flies to South Africa. That's the one person who I mentioned earlier had gone to a hospital. And unfortunately, the wife dies by April 26th. Test results by May 4th show that she was indeed positive for the hantavirus. On April 27th, the second ill passenger is evacuated to South Africa. Test results on May 2nd are also positive for the hantavirus, bringing our total up to the 2 that were mentioned. On May 2nd, a German woman who showed symptoms by April 28th dies aboard the ship. And by the next day, May 3rd, the ship arrives in Cape Verde. The World Health Organization says it's reacting to a suspected hantavirus outbreak by this point on the ship, which now has 3 other people who have fallen ill. So that is 3 people, unfortunately, deceased, 1 person transported to a hospital off the ship, and 3 more suspected to have hantavirus on the ship currently. So how does one get hantavirus? Usually you have to breathe in air particles containing an infected rodent saliva, urine, feces. It's not transmissible from person to person, except for one particular strand of the virus, the Andes hantavirus. And at least 2 of the infected of the 7 were traveling through Argentina leading up to the cruise, which is an area where the Andes version of the hantavirus is suspected to hang out in. So it's almost certain that the Andes strain of the hantavirus is the one that the World Health Organization is afraid has broken out on the cruise ship, because it's also the only hantavirus we know of that has person-to-person transmission. However, Andes hantavirus is usually only spread through very close contact from person to person. So the likelihood of it becoming a full-blown epidemic or even a pandemic are extremely low. It probably have to become drastically mutated in terms of its communicability for it to become a real threat in that manner. But maybe that's the case with this hantavirus. Maybe it's the case that this outbreak of the hantavirus was bioengineered in some reminiscent way of the gain-of-function research that was being done in the lead up to COVID-19. But for right now, we'll just have to see how these events unfold. I think the thing that has everybody on the edge of their seat is really this latency period. You know, this idea that for the hantavirus, it's 1 to 8 weeks. And so, I mean, imagine in that scenario where it's 8 weeks, you have people walking around for 2 full months with no symptoms, potentially transmitting it person to person, and no one would know the wiser. And so to bring back terms that we haven't heard since 2020, 2021, the World Health Organization is doing tracing on all the members of the boats, all the medical staff that have come into contact, especially with the woman who was transported to the hospital from the cruise ship. And the situation just, at this point, is being monitored closely. So with all that in mind, I've been seeing quite a lot of clips on social media comparing these like initial conditions of hantavirus to the early days of COVID, and just saying basically like, here's the next government engineered pandemic for you. So I wanted to give a little bit of perspective on that and illustrate a certain point about lockdowns. Maybe you believe that hantavirus, or really any virus, can be used by the state at any moment to force a population into lockdown, to restrict their freedom of movement, and sever their abilities to defy the state in any organized fashion. But consider that we already have an example of this, and it happened recently, COVID-19. Consider also that the summer of 2020 had some of the highest upticks in protests for causes on both sides of the political aisle. On one side, we saw Black Lives Matter protests that would become infiltrated by the FBI. And if you want to hear all about that, you can listen to episode number 11 of the podcast. On the other side, we saw anti-mask and anti-lockdown movements, and then even the culmination of those things in a rally in DC that led to January 6th. In either case, there was more civil disobedience and demonstrations than at any time in the modern era since at least the 1960s. Lockdowns led to a kind of radicalization that hasn't quite left our body politics even to this day. And if the point of COVID was to prevent Trump from getting reelected, congratulations, he's as powerful as ever. So in any case, if hantavirus were to be used as a way to lock down people, get their freedom of movement and freedom of assembly to basically vanish overnight, we see a clear case in COVID-19 that it's just not going to work. Essentially, if COVID was ever used for these means, it completely backfired. What would probably happen if hantavirus forced the country into another set of lockdowns in the 2020s is that people would probably become even more radicalized, even more distrustful of the government, and people who had a bunch of free time on their hands, I think, would find ways to organize against the activities that the Trump administration was conducting. So even though this idea of COVID lockdowns being a suppressant on the population backfiring, there's still a chance that this current administration would use tactics like that blind to even recent history that it was a part of. And we have many cases of the government acting quite recklessly to get its goals accomplished in this second term. But as a populace, we should probably learn a few things about COVID instead of pretending like it never happened in the first place. And one of those things is that a population becomes more radicalized the more restrictions that you place upon it, or at least the American populace does. One book I recommend wholeheartedly that deals with these concepts is Epidemics and Societies, From the Black Death to the Present by Frank M. Snowden. And this book helped me to understand that populations that already distrust their government, much like Americans in the 2010s and the 2020s, are going to come up with conspiracy theories about diseases that are outbreaking at the end of the day anyways. There's almost nothing you can do to stop it. The amount of conspiratorial thinking and the amount of unhelpful thinking is directly proportional to the amount that the populace distrusts its government or the people administering the cure. So why would hantavirus be any different? The American population actually became more radicalized in response to COVID lockdowns, more willing to engage in bolder politics. They didn't buckle in fear or, frankly, even adhere to measures that were created for their own safety. And can you imagine the fatigue that people will feel if we endure another summer and maybe another one after that of lockdowns due to this hantavirus? A large segment of the populace would get fatigue in the sense of saying, this can't be as bad as COVID was. We did lockdowns back then. I didn't really get sick, so I'm not going to lock down or take any safety measures for this hantavirus. In fact, the more that we disregard what happened during COVID, our response to it as a nation, the less prepared we would be to face another disease. So I'm just praying personally that that disease isn't hantavirus, which has a much higher mortality rate. And if the communicability from person to person became high enough, I think it'd be a terrible problem that would blow COVID out of the water. But the question I want to leave you with is, are we really more prepared to deal with another COVID-style event than we were in 2020? And I think we can all guess the answer to that one. And to give you guys a lovely update since creating the script for this segment, it looks like 40 people that disembarked on the first leg of the journey while the latency period for the hantavirus was going on with the people who fell ill, those people, at least some of them, went back to their home countries. At least one of those people is from Arizona. And so it looks like the next step of this potentially viral outbreak has occurred. Even though the World Health Organization does stress that to the general populace, it's not something to be worried about at this moment. But it looks like as of now, we're just going to be keeping a trace on those 40 individuals. And I guess just praying that hantavirus does not become the next COVID.